Hello, everyone. Carter Krishner here. Sorry I'm late to this. I had a big a World Cup related event that I was the press officer for the Miami Ball Run yesterday on Friday. So I was not able to weigh in on the passing of Sir Garry Sobers, who is arguably the greatest cricketer of all time. There's some other names on that list. Maybe there's one or two cricketers that are still active, like Virat Kohli, who might be eventually, but Kohli's not an all-rounder. So I think this is in my opinion, greatest cricketer of all time. If we're talking about the greatest batter, it might be Tendulkar. I mean, there are a lot of Indian players that are in that mix for greatest batter. But if you talk about all-rounders, I think you're talking a lot about a lot of Australians, a lot of West Indians, and maybe some English players. So Garry Sobers passed away, I guess, Thursday night at the age of 89. And we're in an era in all sports, right? It's not just cricket. We're in an area of specialization. And that's something that was not the case. I think this is the case in every sport, even in football, a sport where you have to go end to end and it's 11v11. The total football concept of the Dutch and of Cruyff era, it's a little different now because you have specialists and you now have 5 substitutions in that sport. And in cricket now we have spin bowlers, we have seamers, we have death bowlers, right? Which is something I've talked about a lot on this channel, right? Death bowlers and their role and everything, and pure batters, all of this stuff. And so this is why he is, in my opinion, the greatest cricketer of all time, because he could do it all. He was left-handed, and I first off, let me state that I've only watched Sobers cricket through secondhand film, right, and films. I was the year he retired was the year I was born, so I never watched him live, but he had this kind of high, elegant backlift, and he was left-handed batsman that could hit spin like you wouldn't believe it. He had this kind of follow-through, really kind of classic technique that Caribbean batters tried to emulate for years. And in terms of bowling, I mean, he was just he could bowl fast medium with his left. He could turn himself into a spinner, and particularly with a new ball, you would try and go medium pace, or you would try and be a pacer. But he was even able to do left hand spin, a left arm spin when he needed, or wrist spinners. Again, all rounder. And he was an insanely good fielder. I don't think we talk about this enough with cricketers these days. He used to work well with the bowlers that he played with for West Indies. The likes of Lance Gibson. Well, let's talk about, though, in 1958, that match against Pakistan that I think is the focus of so many of the eulogies today, that 365 not out. It was the highest individual score in Test cricket until Brian Lara broke it, I think, in 1995 or so, 95 or 96. I'd have to check the date on that. But that was, that was the highest ever score. And then in county cricket in England, when he was captaining Nottinghamshire, and it was a big deal in those days for kind of a West Indian black cricketer to captain a county cricket side, but he was the greatest, so of course he did. He hit in a single over I can't remember the bowler's name. I feel bad for the bowler. I don't want to mention who the bowler was. I don't remember the name quite honestly, but I'm doing this sort of off the cuff. He hit 6 sixes in that over, 36 runs off of 6 balls. I mean, you can't do any better than that unless there's some extras, right? Some wide deliveries and no balls in there. He was the first player to ever cross 8,000 runs in Test cricket. And I can imagine what he would have done with the reduced over form of cricket, the fixed over form of cricket that has now become so mainstream. And he was knighted in 1975 after he retired by Queen Elizabeth II. Now, keep in mind, for much of the time, West Indies, even though they had their own national team, they were a British crown colony or dependency or whatever, that, part of the British Empire. Remember, India had a national team that predated and competed in the Olympics that predated Indian independence. In fact, legally, India had a different kind of. India was the Indian Empire and was in theory, a different entity from Britain, even though it was part of the British Empire. It's just that the emperor or empress of India was always the king or queen of England, right? And all the civil administrators were British. And then eventually India has its own parliament, even before independence. But the franchise is very hard to get. Maybe 1% of the population is eligible to vote. But they had their own national team, and so did the West Indies. And he was someone who was really influential on other cricketers. And I would say on other cricketers, not just in the West Indies, particularly influential in the West Indies, but especially when it came down to England and county cricket. And there is also the influence he had, I think, on the way batters approached pitches in the West Indies in particular, because they were the conditions there. It's not just the pitches themselves, but the atmospheric conditions. This is the thing about cricket, that this, the international team sports. This is something Americans have to really understand. International team sports have evolved in many different ways. So you hear now, I think you see more kind of universal tactics in football. But the reason it's used as a condescension. The reason the English played a lot of long ball, the reason the Italians played catenaccio, the reason football looked the way it did in Latin America, the reason football developed, the total football mentality developed in the Netherlands. These are all indigenous forms of tactics that adapted to climate, to pitch sizes, to all of those sorts of things. And cricket is no different. I mentioned this in terms of India's struggles in the British Isles, in terms of how they were able to approach the tracks and the wickets in Belfast and in the north of England in particular. So the conditions there are different than in London. They are different than you face in the Indian subcontinent. And they are different than you face in Australia or in Oceania, right? I mean, New Zealand is a little bit more like the UK, but Australia is not. Australia's climate is wholly different from that of the British Isles. It's more like sort of what you face in the United States here. And in the US, India has been pretty successful when they've come here. So there was an understanding that, okay, cricket and the conditions of cricket are different in the West Indies. It's tropical, it's very humid. The ball does different things if you're bowling on the track. The wicket plays differently. There has to be an adaptability to that. Now, the thing that was so incredible about Sobers is he understood this. He was able to adapt his bowling and his batting to the conditions of the British Isles, to the conditions of the Indian subcontinent, to the conditions of Australia and Oceania when they traveled there. I mean, let's not forget when Sobers was a star. Cricket was a game completely contained within former British colonies, right? The Netherlands were not playing cricket then. Italy was not playing cricket then. The United States, the United States is a former British colony. But yeah, you know what I mean, right? And in fact, cricket was the biggest sport in the U.S. prior to the American war between the states, or Civil War, some of y'all call it. but it had faded. So at this point, the point when Sobers is playing, it is a game that is sort of being played just within colonies that were recently British. That would also include Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, right? But all of those places are different, and you had to adapt your cricket to those different conditions. Now it's even more apparent because you have more countries playing cricket. You have these outside nations. Afghanistan didn't play cricket until about 20 or 25 years ago. Now they're a really good national team. The USA, I mean, that's kind of a lot of the focus of what I do here as an American, is that the USA, cricket always existed in the US. It's not like Afghanistan where it didn't exist, but it's come more into the mainstream, and just the US is much more competitive internationally than they've ever been at this point. And Canada, I see cricket pitches in Canada when I go there. So there is, that's a recent British territory also, but also was always influenced by American thoughts. So Sobers, to me, is the greatest because of his all-around nature, because of what he gave to the game. He was an ambassador for the sport for so long. I think he was respected all over the place and all over the world. Is this equivalent to Pele's passing a few years ago in football? Maybe not quite that, but I think it is. I think it is pretty big. I think this is maybe the greatest sportsman in a specific sport passing. At least someone who's top 5. I put him number 1, but I think everybody's got to acknowledge he's top 5.